Italy entered World War II with grand imperial ambitions, hoping to carve out a new Mediterranean empire under Mussolini's fascist regime. The leadership envisioned a new Roman Empire that would dominate the sea. Yet the reality of their military readiness was starkly different. The 1940 invasion of France was intended to be a decisive display of strength, yet it remained a largely symbolic, hollow gesture. Italian forces moved into the Alpine passes, but their progress was slow, hampered by difficult terrain and a lack of modern equipment. By the time Italian forces engaged, Germany had already secured the primary victory, leaving Italy with minimal territorial gains and little glory. This lack of meaningful contribution to the fall of France set a troubling precedent for the campaigns that would follow in North Africa. This pattern of military embarrassment quickly intensified in North Africa, where Italy launched an ambitious invasion of Egypt to seize the Suez. Mussolini dreamed of cutting off the British lifeline, but his generals were poorly prepared for the logistical demands of desert warfare. The offensive was swiftly dismantled by British forces during Operation Compass, exposing the severe lack of modern equipment and strategic preparation. British armored units moved with surprising speed, encircling Italian divisions and capturing thousands of prisoners across the vast, unforgiving Libyan desert. The resulting disaster forced Mussolini to humble himself, requesting urgent German intervention to prevent a total collapse in the North African theater. This dependency marked the arrival of Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps, who took command to stabilize the front for the struggling Italians. With German leadership, the tide of battle shifted, but the Italian military found itself increasingly sidelined in its own primary theater of operations. Simultaneously, the 1940 invasion of Greece from Albanian soil proved to be an even more humiliating catastrophe for the Italian high command. Mussolini launched this attack without consulting Hitler, hoping to demonstrate Italian independence and secure a quick victory in the Balkans. Despite initial confidence and numerical superiority, Italian forces faced fierce Greek resistance that halted their advance and pushed them into retreat. The rugged mountains of Epirus became a graveyard for Italian ambitions as the Greek army launched a counteroffensive back into Albania. The regime was left humiliated, proving incapable of sustaining its own offensive operations without significant external support from its powerful Axis partner. Germany was forced to intervene in the Balkans to save their ally, shifting focus away from other strategic priorities to secure the southern flank. This intervention solidified the perception of Italy as a junior partner, one that required constant rescue by the more efficient German Wehrmacht. Following the collapse of Greek resistance, the Balkans were carved up, with Yugoslavia and Greece divided between the various Axis powers. Italy was granted occupation zones, but these regions quickly became hotbeds of partisan activity, draining resources and manpower from the Italian army. The occupation duties were grueling, as Italian troops struggled to maintain control against local resistance movements that refused to be suppressed. This series of failures fundamentally shattered the myth of Italian military prowess, leaving the nation trapped in a cycle of strategic dependency. The dream of a Mediterranean empire was rapidly fading, replaced by the grim reality of a war that Italy was ill-equipped to fight. Every campaign launched by Rome seemed to require a German bailout, eroding the morale of the soldiers and the confidence of the public. The logistical strain of maintaining these occupation zones further weakened the Italian economy, which was already struggling under the weight of total war. As the conflict dragged on, the disparity between Italian and German military effectiveness became an open secret among the Axis high command. Mussolini's decision to enter the war had been based on the assumption of a short conflict, but the reality was a long, attritional struggle. The Mediterranean, once seen as an Italian lake, became a contested space where the Royal Navy and the Luftwaffe dominated the action. Italian naval forces, despite some successes, were unable to secure the supply lines necessary to sustain the campaigns in North Africa. The failure to protect these vital shipping lanes meant that troops on the front lines often went without food, fuel, or ammunition. This systemic failure reflected deeper issues within the Italian military structure, which remained tethered to outdated doctrines and industrial limitations. The inability to modernize the armed forces meant that Italian units were consistently outclassed by their British and German counterparts in combat. By the time the Balkan occupation was fully established, it was clear that Italy had lost the initiative in its own sphere of influence. The strategic landscape had shifted, and Italy was now a pawn in a larger game, dictated by the requirements of the German war effort. Partisan resistance in the occupied territories grew bolder, turning the Balkans into a constant drain on the already stretched Italian military resources. The dream of territorial expansion had turned into a nightmare of policing hostile populations while simultaneously fighting a global superpower. Each failure in the field served to deepen the reliance on Berlin, effectively stripping Italy of its autonomy in military decision-making processes. The political cost of these failures was immense, as the fascist government struggled to justify the mounting casualties to its own people. Propaganda efforts tried to frame these campaigns as successes, but the reality on the ground was impossible to hide from the public. The myth of the new Roman soldier was being dismantled by every retreat and every request for German reinforcements on the front. Italy's entry into the war was meant to be a triumph, yet it had become a liability that threatened the stability of the Axis. The strategic blunders of 1940 and 1941 left the Italian military exhausted, demoralized, and fundamentally incapable of independent strategic action. As the war progressed, the focus shifted from winning new territories to simply holding on to what had already been captured or occupied. The occupation zones in Greece and Yugoslavia became symbols of the overextension that would eventually lead to the collapse of the regime. Italian commanders were often left in the dark by their German counterparts, who viewed them as unreliable and prone to sudden failures. The lack of coordination between the Axis partners meant that resources were often wasted, and opportunities for victory were frequently missed. This disconnect was particularly evident in North Africa, where the Italian contribution was increasingly relegated to secondary support roles. The lessons of these early campaigns were clear, yet the leadership in Rome proved unable or unwilling to change their failed strategy. The cycle of dependency was self-reinforcing, as each new crisis required more German intervention, further eroding Italian sovereign control over its forces. The soldiers on the front lines paid the ultimate price for these strategic failures, fighting with obsolete gear against a determined enemy. The Mediterranean theater became a secondary concern for the Axis. Yet, for Italy, it was the only theater that truly mattered for survival. The occupation of the Balkans served only to spread the Italian army too thin, making them vulnerable to both external attacks and internal revolt. By mid-1941, the initial enthusiasm for the war had evaporated, replaced by a grim resignation to the reality of the ongoing conflict. The failures in France, North Africa, and Greece were not just military defeats. They were symptoms of a nation unprepared for global war. The dream of a Mediterranean empire was now a distant memory, replaced by the daily struggle to maintain a presence in occupied lands. The strategic dependency on Germany was now total, leaving Italy with little room to maneuver as the tide of the war began turning. History would remember these early campaigns, not as the start of a new empire, but as the beginning of the end for Mussolini. These early disasters set the stage for the eventual collapse of the Italian fascist state, a consequence of hubris and military incompetence. The necessity for German intervention in the Balkans fundamentally redefined Italy's status, cementing its role as a junior partner perpetually in need of rescue. Mussolini had hoped for a quick victory to bolster his prestige, but the reality on the ground proved to be a humiliating strategic failure. As the German military machine rolled into the region, Greek defenses eventually collapsed, forcing a rapid reorganization of the entire Balkan theater under Axis control. This intervention was not merely a tactical maneuver. It was a clear signal that the Italian military lacked the capacity to secure its own borders. The territory was soon carved up into occupation zones, with Italy assuming responsibility for specific, volatile regions across Yugoslavia and parts of mainland Greece. These zones were intended to project Italian power and authority, yet they became symbols of a military force stretched far beyond its actual capabilities. However, these newly occupied lands did not bring the stability that Rome had envisioned. Instead, they quickly transformed into dangerous hotbeds of resistance. Local populations, unwilling to accept the presence of foreign occupiers, began to organize, turning the occupied territories into a logistical nightmare for the Italians. For the Italian military, this occupation proved to be a draining commitment, requiring substantial resources that the nation was increasingly struggling to provide. Supplies, ammunition, and manpower were diverted from other critical fronts, further weakening Italy's overall position in the broader Mediterranean theater of the war. This phase of the war starkly highlighted the severe strategic limitations of the Italian military and the growing, lopsided imbalance of power within the alliance. The reliance on German support became an inescapable reality, as every Italian failure necessitated a larger, more controlling presence from their powerful northern ally. Ultimately, Italy found itself trapped in a cycle of occupation and dependency, a burden that would continue to exhaust its national strength until the war's end. The dream of a new Roman Empire was rapidly fading, replaced by the grim reality of a secondary power struggling to maintain its own sovereignty. As the conflict dragged on, the internal pressure within Italy began to mount, fueled by the mounting costs of these failed military adventures abroad. The Balkan campaign served as a microcosm of the wider war, illustrating the disconnect between fascist ambition and the harsh realities of industrial warfare. Every garrison established in the mountains of Greece or the forests of Yugoslavia required constant reinforcement, draining the morale of the Italian troops. The local partisan movements grew increasingly sophisticated, utilizing the rugged terrain to launch effective ambushes against the overextended Italian occupation forces. These skirmishes were not decisive battles, but they created a constant state of attrition that eroded the effectiveness of the Italian army over time. Commanders in the field found themselves unable to pacify the regions, leading to a cycle of brutal reprisals that only fueled further local hostility. The strategic objective of securing the Balkans had backfired, turning a potential asset into a permanent, bleeding wound for the Italian military establishment. German observers grew increasingly critical of their allies' performance, viewing the Italian occupation as a distraction that required constant oversight and intervention. This dynamic created a toxic atmosphere within the Axis High Command, where Italy's needs were often viewed as secondary to Germany's global strategic goals. The logistical strain was compounded by the lack of modern equipment, as Italian industry struggled to keep pace with the demands of a multi-front war. Soldiers were often left without adequate winter clothing or sufficient ammunition, further diminishing their ability to maintain control over the volatile occupied territories. The occupation zones became isolated pockets of tension, where communication lines were frequently severed by partisan sabotage and local insurgent activity. Rome's inability to provide clear strategic direction left its commanders in the field to navigate an increasingly impossible situation with limited resources. The prestige that Mussolini sought to gain through these campaigns was replaced by a growing sense of isolation and military incompetence on the world stage. Each passing month in the Balkans deepened the dependency on Berlin, as the Germans were forced to take a more direct role in managing the region. The Italian military, once proud and ambitious, was now reduced to performing auxiliary duties under the watchful eye of their German counterparts. This shift in power dynamics was not lost on the Italian public, who began to question the wisdom of a war that seemed to offer only sacrifice. The occupation of Greece and Yugoslavia stands as a testament to the dangers of overreach and the failure to align national goals with military capacity. As the war progressed, The situation in the Balkans would only grow more desperate, reflecting the broader collapse of the Axis position in Europe. The lessons of these early campaigns were clear, yet the leadership in Rome remained committed to a path that led inevitably toward total disaster. The occupation was not just a military failure, it was a political catastrophe that eroded the last vestiges of legitimacy for the fascist regime. By the time the tide of the war began to turn, the Italian forces in the Balkans were already hollowed out, exhausted by years of futile occupation. The legacy of this period is one of wasted potential, where the lives of thousands were lost in a conflict that offered no strategic advantage. Historians look back at these campaigns as the moment when Italy lost its autonomy, becoming a mere puppet in the grand design of the Third Reich. The inability to secure the Balkans forced Germany to divert resources that were desperately needed elsewhere, ultimately weakening the entire Axis war effort. The partisan resistance movements, meanwhile, gained strength and organization, eventually becoming a force that would play a significant role in the liberation of the region. The Italian experience in the Balkans serves as a stark reminder of how military hubris can lead a nation into a trap of its own making. The occupation was marked by a series of missed opportunities and strategic blunders that left the Italian army vulnerable and demoralized in the field. As the occupation dragged on, the divide between the Italian leadership and the reality of the war widened, leading to a total breakdown in planning. The soldiers on the ground bore the brunt of these failures, fighting a war they did not understand for a cause that seemed increasingly hollow. The Balkan theater became a graveyard for Italian aspirations, a place where the dream of Mediterranean dominance was finally laid to rest in the mountains. The reliance on German aid, once a temporary necessity, became a permanent feature of the Italian war effort, signaling the end of any true independence. In the end, the occupation of the Balkans was a tragic chapter in the history of the war, illustrating the high cost of unchecked nationalist ambition. The failure to secure these territories ensured that Italy would remain a junior partner, forever bound to the fate of a Germany that was already overextended.